It all began with a family dinner that should have been harmless. Robert had insisted we host his parents at our Victorian townhouse in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood. I'd spent the entire day preparing his mother's favorite pot roast, arranging fresh peonies on the dining table, and making sure everything was immaculate. That's what Margaret expected from her daughter-in-law: perfection. I rarely wore jewelry besides my wedding band, but that evening, I decided to wear the diamond necklace my grandmother Elaine had given me before she passed. It wasn't ostentatious by any means, just a delicate pendant with a single diamond that caught the light in the most beautiful way. I'd only worn it once before, on our wedding night 3 years ago, when Robert had smiled and called it charming but perhaps a bit modest for a Carter bride. The dinner progressed as usual, Robert discussing his recent promotion at the investment firm, his father nodding approvingly, and his mother peppering the conversation with subtle critiques about everything from my cooking to my career choices. I was used to it by now, having perfected the art of the polite smile that never quite reached my eyes. It wasn't until dessert that Margaret's gaze fixed on my necklace. "What a lovely piece," she said, her voice dripping with that particular tone I'd come to recognize. Not quite complimentary, more assessing, as if valuing property. "It looks antique." "It was my grandmother's," I replied softly. "She gave it to me before she died." "Family heirlooms are so precious," Margaret continued, reaching across the table to touch it without asking. Her manicured fingers lingered a moment too long. "They should stay in the family, don't you think, Robert?" My husband's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. "Absolutely, Mother." The conversation moved on, but I felt something shift in the air, like the first warning drops before a downpour. When his parents finally left around 11, Robert kissed his mother's cheek and promised to call her tomorrow. I waved from the doorway, relieved the evening was over. Later that night, as I was removing my makeup in our ensuite bathroom, Robert appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. His reflection in the mirror looked calm, but I knew better. After 3 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. "Mother really admired your necklace," he said casually. I nodded, continuing to wipe away my mascara. "She did mention it, yes. You know her birthday is coming up next month." I paused, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "Robert, what are you saying?" He pushed off from the door frame and moved closer, placing his hands on my shoulders. His grip was gentle, but firm. "I think it would be a wonderful gesture if you gave it to her. She's done so much for us, Sarah. The connections that got me the Anderson account came directly through her. The down payment for this house." I turned to face him, disbelief rising in my chest. "This necklace is all I have left of my grandmother. She raised me when my parents died. You know that." His expression hardened. "It's just a necklace, Sarah. And frankly, it's not even that valuable. Mother would appreciate the sentiment more than the piece itself. I can't give it away. I'm sorry, but I can't." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes then. He stepped back, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "You know, sometimes I wonder if you ever consider anyone but yourself. After everything my family has done for you, bringing you into our world, our social circle, and you can't make one simple gesture of gratitude. This isn't about gratitude, Robert. This is about my past, my family." He laughed, but it was cold and sharp. "Your family? A grandmother who lived in a rundown apartment in Somerville? What kind of legacy is that compared to what the Carters have given you?" His words cut deep, exposing the unspoken truth of our marriage. That he saw himself as my savior, lifting me from my middle-class upbringing into Boston's elite. That my past was something to be ashamed of, something to erase. "I won't give her the necklace," I said quietly, but firmly. Robert's face transformed then, flushing with a rage I'd glimpsed only a handful of times before. He paced our bedroom like a caged animal, his voice rising with each word. "You ungrateful, selfish woman. Do you have any idea what I've done for you? What doors I've opened? What I've overlooked?" "Overlooked?" I echoed, confusion mingling with growing fear. "Your background, your lack of connections, your community college education," he spat out. "I saw potential in you, Sarah. Raw material that could be shaped into a Carter wife. But lately, I'm starting to think I made a mistake." I stood frozen by the bathroom door, not out of confusion but pure disbelief. In 3 years of marriage, the facade had never slipped this completely. The charming, confident man I'd married was revealing himself fully, not as my partner, but as my owner. "The necklace stays with me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He moved so quickly I didn't have time to react. Suddenly he was inches from my face, his breath hot on my skin. "You will pay dearly for this disobedience, Sarah. That's a promise." Then he was gone, slamming our bedroom door with such force that the framed wedding photo on the wall tilted askew. I sank to the floor, my hand clutching the diamond pendant at my throat, feeling my grandmother's strength somehow flowing through it into my trembling body. In the silence of our beautiful Beacon Hill home, surrounded by expensive furnishings and the trappings of the life Robert had given me, I realized with startling clarity that I was imprisoned in a gilded cage of my own making. And for the first time, I began to wonder how I might find the key. The warning before the storm. The next morning arrived with a suffocating quiet. Robert had slept in the guest room, a first in our marriage, and I moved through our home like a ghost, afraid to disturb the fragile peace. I made coffee, my hands still shaking slightly as I measured the grounds into the expensive Italian machine his parents had given us as a wedding present. When Robert finally emerged at 7:30, dressed impeccably in his charcoal suit and burgundy tie, he didn't acknowledge me. He poured his coffee into his travel mug, added a precise teaspoon of sugar, and stirred it exactly 3 times. The same routine as always, except for the cold vacancy where his morning kiss should have been. "I'll be late tonight," he said finally, his voice clipped and formal. "Dinner with the Whitmores." The Whitmores were clients, but also friends. At least, I had thought they were our friends. Now I realized they were his friends, his connections. "Should I join you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me then, his blue eyes chillingly empty. "That won't be necessary." He checked his Rolex, a family heirloom from his grandfather, and added, "Don't wait up." After he left, I sat at our kitchen island, surrounded by the marble countertops and sub-zero appliances that had once made me feel like I'd made it, like I belonged in this world of privilege. Now they felt like props in a play where I'd forgotten my lines. I was washing my coffee cup when my phone buzzed with a notification. My credit card had been declined for a subscription renewal. Strange, since that account always had a healthy balance from my part-time work at the gallery on Newbury Street. I logged into the banking app to find the account completely empty. A cold wave of realization washed over me. This wasn't just Robert being angry. This was calculated. I checked our joint accounts to find my name removed as an authorized user. 3 years of marriage, and within 12 hours, I had been financially erased. Before panic could fully take hold, my phone rang. It was Lisa, Robert's younger sister, calling from her apartment in Cambridge. We'd grown close over the years, or so I'd believed. "Sarah," she said, her voice unnaturally stiff. "I wanted to let you know I can't make lunch next week." "Oh," I replied, confused. "We didn't have plans, did we?" A pause. "I just thought, well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to be busy for the foreseeable future. Dissertation work. You know how it is." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at my phone, putting the pieces together. Robert had already started his campaign. Not just financial isolation, but social too. How many other calls had he made this morning? How many other doors were now closed to me? Around noon, I decided to walk to the gallery where I worked. Martin, the owner, had become something of a mentor to me, encouraging my interest in art beyond the administrative work I did for him. The familiar bell jingled as I pushed open the door, but Martin's usually warm face was guarded when he saw me. "Sarah," he said, glancing behind me as if expecting someone else. "I wasn't expecting you today." "I know. I just thought I'd stop by to check on the Hamilton collection." Martin fidgeted with the papers on the counter. "About that. And your position here. I received a call from Robert this morning." My stomach dropped. "What kind of call?" "He mentioned you were dealing with some personal issues. Said you needed time away from work." Martin wouldn't meet my eyes. "He's an important client, Sarah. The Carters have bought pieces from this gallery for generations." "Martin, I don't need time away. Whatever Robert told you." "He also mentioned the gallery loan," Martin interrupted, his voice low. Said there might be issues with the terms if things became complicated. I felt the blood drain from my face. The gallery had been struggling last year, and Robert had arranged a private loan through his firm. I hadn't known he'd held on to that leverage. I see, I managed to say. Martin finally looked at me, genuine regret in his eyes. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'd like to help, but I can't risk the gallery. I nodded numbly and left without another word. Standing on Newbury Street, surrounded by the springtime bustle of shoppers and tourists, I'd never felt more alone. Robert wasn't just angry. He was systematically cutting every tie I had, unmaking my life with terrifying precision. I walked aimlessly for hours, eventually finding myself at the public garden. I sat on a bench near the swan boats, watching families and couples enjoy the sunny afternoon. In the 3 years since I'd married Robert, I'd gradually lost touch with my old friends, my old self. I'd been so mesmerized by his world, so eager to belong, that I hadn't noticed how dependent I'd become. My phone buzzed again, a group text from Amanda, my college roommate, uninviting me from her baby shower next weekend. The wording was awkward, apologetic, but firm. Another domino falling. By the time I returned to Beacon Hill, the shadows were long across the cobblestone streets. Our townhouse loomed before me, no longer feeling like home, but like a beautiful museum where I was no longer welcome. I climbed the steps slowly, bracing myself for what might come next. Inside, the house was dark and silent. I turned on lights as I moved through the rooms, trying to dispel the growing sense of dread. In the living room, I noticed something odd. The antique side table where we displayed family photos was bare. All the pictures of me, of us together, had vanished. Only the Carter family portraits remained. My hands trembled as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. The closet door stood open, and half the contents were gone. Robert's half. A note lay on the bed, his handwriting precise and controlled. I'm staying at the Lenox Hotel until you reconsider your position. I've taken the liberty of making certain financial arrangements that should help clarify your priorities. Mother has always admired your necklace, and frankly, it's a small price to pay for the life you've enjoyed. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the paper so tightly it crumpled in my fist. This wasn't a tantrum. It was warfare. Systematic, calculated, and cruelly effective. In less than 24 hours, he had begun dismantling my life with surgical precision. For the first time, I saw Robert, truly saw him, not as the charming man who had swept me off my feet, but as someone capable of breathtaking cruelty. The realization should have crushed me, but instead, something hardened inside my chest. A seed of determination took root where fear had been growing. I moved to the ornate mirror above my vanity and fastened my grandmother's necklace around my throat. The diamond caught the dying light from the window, throwing scattered rainbows across the wall. In its gleam, I saw not just my past, but possibly my future, if I was brave enough to claim it. I felt like a guest in what had been my home for 3 years. Every object, every wall seemed to whisper that I didn't belong, that I was surrounded by things he owned, in a life he had constructed to look perfect from the outside. But no one could see the bruises left by his silence, nor the emotional fractures he so carefully concealed in public. I knew then that I had one choice: to vanish before I was completely erased. The silent escape plan. I slept fitfully that night, if you could call it sleep at all. Every creak of the old townhouse startled me awake, my heart pounding with the fear that Robert had returned. By dawn, I had made my decision. I couldn't, give him the satisfaction of my surrender. If he wanted war, I would disappear from the battlefield entirely. With shaking hands, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen island, creating a mental inventory of what I needed to do. The Robert I now recognized wouldn't stop at financial and social isolation. Soon he would escalate, finding new ways to punish me until I broke. I had perhaps days, maybe only hours, before his tactics became even more destructive. My first call was to Emma, a college friend I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. She had never liked Robert, calling him too polished after meeting him at our engagement party. I had dismissed her concerns as jealousy then, Now I desperately hoped she would answer despite the early hour. "Sarah?" Her voice was thick with sleep, but instantly alert. "Are you okay?" The simple question nearly broke me. "No," I whispered. "I'm not. And I need help." To her eternal credit, Emma asked no questions beyond what I was willing to share. When I told her I needed to leave Robert and might need a place to stay temporarily, she didn't hesitate. "My spare room is yours for as long as you need it. I'm in Providence now. He wouldn't think to look for you here." Relief flooded through me. The first piece of my escape plan clicked into place. "Thank you," I managed. "I'll text you when I'm on my way. It might be a day or two. I need to get some things in order first. Be careful, Sarah, and delete this call from your history." After hanging up, I did exactly that, then pulled out a notepad to make a list. I couldn't risk leaving a digital trail. My hands were steadier now, my mind clearer with purpose. First, I needed money. Robert had emptied my personal account and removed me from our joint accounts. But he didn't know about the safety deposit box. When my grandmother died 5 years ago, she had left me not just the necklace, but a small inheritance, $15,000 that I had never mentioned to Robert. He had always been dismissive of my humble origins, as he called them, and I had kept this last connection to her private. Now, that secret would buy my freedom. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy dress and pearl earrings, the proper Carter wife heading out for morning errands. The diamond necklace stayed hidden beneath my clothing, its weight against my skin a constant reminder of why I was doing this. At Cambridge Savings Bank, I approached the teller with a practiced smile. "I'd like to access my safety deposit box, please." I presented my ID and keys, and was led to the private room where I could examine the contents. Inside the metal box lay the envelope of cash, some of my grandmother's letters, and a deed to her small property in western Massachusetts, a half-acre plot with a dilapidated cabin that Robert had sneered at when I inherited it. Worthless, he'd called it. Now it represented possibility. I took everything, tucking the envelope into my handbag. As I left the bank, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Robert or one of his friends watching me. But the street was filled only with strangers going about their day, unaware of the quiet revolution happening in their midst. My next stop was a small credit union across town, where I opened a new account under just my legal name, Sarah Thompson, not Sarah Carter. I deposited most of the cash, keeping only $1,000 for immediate expenses. The account came with a debit card that I could use without leaving an obvious trail. One more piece of my plan secured. Back at the townhouse, I began the careful process of selecting what to take with me. The practical side of me knew I should pack light, only essentials that wouldn't immediately be missed. But each item I considered carried emotional weight. The photo albums from before my marriage, the worn paperback of Jane Eyre that had been my mother's, the small watercolor I'd painted during our honeymoon in Nantucket, before I understood what kind of man I had married. In the end, I settled on a single suitcase of clothes, toiletries, important documents, and just a few sentimental items. Everything else, the designer dresses, the expensive jewelry Robert had given me, the life I had tried to fit into, would stay behind. Let him keep the trappings of the woman he thought he had purchased. Finding my essential documents proved harder than expected. Robert had always insisted on managing our paperwork, keeping it in his home office. I searched carefully through his meticulous filing system, locating my birth certificate, passport, social security card, and medical records. The deed to my grandmother's property was already safely in my purse. I made copies of our marriage license and tax returns, then returned the originals exactly as I'd found them. Each night, while Robert presumably slept in his hotel room, I refined my plan. I deleted my social media accounts rather than just logging out. Robert knew my passwords, and I couldn't risk him tracking my movements. I purchased a prepaid phone from a convenience store miles from our neighborhood, programming only Emma's number into it. I researched bus schedules to Providence and committed them to memory. 3 days after our fight, Robert called. I let it go to voicemail, my heart pounding as I listened to his message. "Sarah, this childish silence isn't helping your situation. Mother asked about you at dinner last night. I told her you weren't feeling well, but her birthday dinner is next week, and she'll expect you there, with an appropriate gift. Call me back so we can discuss your return home." His voice was controlled, reasonable, the voice that had charmed me at a gallery opening 4 years ago. But now I heard the steel beneath the silk, the expectation of compliance. I deleted the message without returning his call. That evening, I received a text from Lisa, his sister. "Whatever he's told you about me, I didn't say it. But I can't get involved, Sarah. I'm sorry." Another small betrayal that somehow hurt more than Robert's calculated cruelty. I didn't respond. 6 days after Robert had walked out, he returned to the townhouse unannounced. I was in the kitchen when I heard his key in the lock, and for a moment, sheer panic froze me in place. We stared at each other across the marble island. Me in jeans and a simple sweater, him impeccable in his business suit. "This has gone on long enough," he said, setting down his briefcase as if returning from a normal day at work. "Mother's birthday dinner is tomorrow night. The Andersons and the Whitmores will be there. I've told everyone you've been ill, which explains your recent absences." I said nothing, watching him move through the kitchen with the casual ownership of a man who had never questioned his right to anything he desired. "I've brought peace offerings," he continued, pulling a velvet box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal a pair of sapphire earrings, "to match your eyes. Wear these tomorrow night when you give Mother the necklace, and we can put this unfortunate episode behind us." The audacity of it, the absolute certainty that I could be bought back with trinkets, made something break loose inside me. A laugh escaped me, surprising us both. Robert's expression darkened. "Something amusing, Sarah?" "You," I said simply. "You really believe this is just a temper tantrum, don't you? That I'll cave if you push the right buttons." He closed the velvet box with a snap. "I believe you're being unreasonable about a piece of jewelry that means far more to my mother than it possibly could to you. It's not about the necklace. It never was. Then what is it about?" His voice had that dangerous edge again, the one I'd heard the night of our fight. I chose my words carefully. "It's about the fact that you see me as something you purchased, not someone you partnered with." His laugh was cold. "Don't be dramatic. I've given you everything. Except respect." Robert's expression shifted then, from irritation to something more calculated. He loosened his tie and moved toward the bar cart in the corner, pouring himself 2 fingers of the expensive scotch he favored. "I think you need time to reconsider your position. I'll stay at the Lennox another night. When I return tomorrow, I expect you to be packed for the dinner and ready to make amends with my mother." He drained the scotch in one swallow, set down the crystal tumbler, and looked at me with eyes that reflected nothing. "Don't mistake my patience for weakness, Sarah. There are consequences to defying me that you haven't begun to imagine." After he left, I stood frozen in the kitchen, listening to the silence of the house. His return had been a strategic move, a reminder of his power, a last chance to fall in line. Instead, it had crystallized my determination. Tomorrow night, while Robert waited for me to appear at his mother's birthday dinner, I would be on a bus to Providence, leaving behind everything except my freedom. That night, as I finalized the details of my departure, I realized I felt no sadness, only a strange sense of lightness. The woman who had walked into this marriage 3 years ago no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who finally understood that freedom was worth any price. The note on the door dawn broke with a soft pink glow over Boston's rooftops. I had barely slept, spending most of the night going over my plan one final time. Today, Margaret Carter would celebrate her 65th birthday, surrounded by Boston's elite. Her ungrateful daughter-in-law would be conspicuously absent. I showered and dressed with deliberate care, choosing comfortable clothes for travel. Dark jeans, a simple blouse, and a lightweight jacket with deep pockets. Nothing flashy, nothing memorable. I braided my hair and applied minimal makeup, already beginning the transformation from Sarah Carter, socialite wife, to Sarah Thompson, independent woman. The diamond necklace lay on the bathroom counter, catching the morning light. I fastened it around my neck, tucking it beneath my blouse where it rested against my skin like a talisman. Everything else I'd packed the night before. One medium-sized suitcase with only essentials. 3 years of marriage reduced to a single piece of luggage. I made a final sweep of the townhouse, checking for anything forgotten. In the kitchen, I placed my set of house keys on the marble island. My wedding and engagement rings followed. The 3-carat diamond and platinum band that had once seemed like symbols of love now revealed as price tags Robert had placed on me. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8. Robert would be at his office now, expecting me to spend the day preparing for tonight's dinner. By the time he realized I was gone, I would be in Providence, beginning my disappearance. I sat at Robert's desk in his home office, the one room in the house that had always been explicitly his territory. The heavy mahogany furniture and leather chairs reeked of old money and privilege. I pulled out a sheet of his monogrammed stationery and uncapped his Mont Blanc pen, a graduation gift from his father. What do you say in a goodbye letter to a man who saw you as property? I had drafted and discarded a dozen versions in my mind over the past week. Some were angry, filled with accusations. Others detailed his manipulations and cruelty. But in the end, I realized that explaining myself to Robert would be giving him power one last time. I wrote simply, "Freedom doesn't ask for permission. You taught me that when you demanded my silence. I've taken back what's mine, including myself. No signature, no tearful goodbye. Just the truth, written in my steady hand on his expensive paper." I folded it once and carried it to the front door, where I taped it at eye level. The last act in a house that had never truly been my home. With my suitcase in hand, I took one final look around. The antique furniture Margaret had helped select, the oil paintings of Carter ancestors looking down with disapproving eyes, the tasteful, soulless perfection that had slowly suffocated me. I felt nothing but relief as I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The morning air carried the scent of blooming cherry trees and possibility. I walked 2 blocks before hailing a cab, giving the driver an address 3 streets away from South Station. Better to be cautious, even now. During the ride, I turned off my iPhone and removed the SIM card, breaking it in half and dropping the pieces into separate trash cans at the station. South Station hummed with the energy of travelers coming and going, lives in transition. I bought my ticket with cash and waited for the bus to Providence, sitting in a corner with my back to the wall, scanning faces out of habit. I didn't expect Robert to be searching for me yet, but caution had become second nature. The bus departed at 9:45, right on schedule. As we pulled away from the terminal, leaving Boston's skyline behind, a weight lifted from my chest. I hadn't realized how suffocating my life had become until I could finally breathe again. The woman next to me was reading a thriller, completely unaware that she sat beside someone in the midst of her own escape story. 2 hours later, I stepped off the bus in Providence. The station was smaller than Boston's, less imposing somehow. Emma waited by her blue Honda Civic, her familiar face breaking into a relieved smile when she spotted me. We had been roommates at UMass Amherst before I'd met Robert at that fateful gallery opening. Before I'd been seduced by the promise of belonging to a world so different from my modest upbringing. "You made it," she said, hugging me tightly. She pulled back to study my face. "Are you okay?" "I will be," I answered, and meant it. Emma's apartment was on the east side of Providence, near Brown University where she taught English literature. It was small but bright, filled with books and mismatched furniture that somehow worked together perfectly. The spare room she'd prepared for me had a desk by the window overlooking a small courtyard garden. "It's not exactly Beacon Hill," she said, setting my suitcase down. "It's perfect," I replied, meaning that too. We spent the afternoon catching up over cups of tea, carefully navigating around the subject of Robert. Emma didn't push for details I wasn't ready to share. Instead, she talked about her classes, her recent breakup with a philosophy professor, the stray cat she'd been feeding on her fire escape, normal life, real life. Around 6 o'clock, just as Margaret's birthday dinner would be starting, my prepaid phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "He's here looking for you. Furious. Told everyone you're having a nervous breakdown. Be careful." No signature, but it could only be Lisa. Despite everything, she'd found a way to warn me. I showed Emma the message. "Do you think he'll come looking for you here?" she asked, worry creasing her brow. "Eventually, maybe. But he doesn't know about you. We haven't spoken in years, and I never mentioned you to him." The calculation in that realization made me sad. How carefully I had edited my past to please a man who saw me as an acquisition. That night, I lay awake in Emma's spare room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her apartment building, a baby crying somewhere upstairs, students returning late from a party, laughing on the street below. the occasional siren in the distance. I thought about Robert discovering my absence, finding the note, his cold rage giving way to disbelief that I, quiet, compliant Sarah, had defied him so completely. I imagined him at his mother's birthday dinner, making excuses for my absence while scanning his phone for messages. The growing realization as hours passed that I wasn't coming back. For a moment, fear gripped me. Robert had resources I couldn't match. Money, connections, influence. If he was determined to find me, could I truly disappear? The diamond necklace seemed suddenly heavy around my throat, the only tangible connection to both my past and the life I'd just fled. But as midnight approached, fear gave way to a strange, fierce joy. Whatever came next would be my choice, my life. For the first time in years, I could see possibilities stretching before me like an open road. I could return to school, finish the art history degree I'd abandoned when I married Robert. I could sell my grandmother's property or rebuild the cabin there. I could become anyone I wanted. I reached for my prepaid phone and composed a text to Lisa. "Thank you. I'm safe. Be well." Then I deleted her number. The path ahead was uncertain, and Robert would not give up easily. But I had taken the first crucial step. I had walked away, left the keys on the table, turned off the phone he could track, written the words that could not be misunderstood. In that small bedroom in Providence, as the first day of my freedom drew to a close, I finally understood what my grandmother had meant when she gave me her necklace. "Remember who you are," she'd said. Not a Carter, not an acquisition, but the granddaughter of Elaine Thompson, a woman who had raised a child alone after being widowed at 30, who had worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, who had taught me that true worth came from within. I fell asleep with my hand curled around the diamond pendant, dreaming not of the past I'd escaped, but of the future I would build. One day, one choice, one act of courage at a time. His pale return. While I was beginning my new life in Providence, I could imagine Robert's evening unfolding with painful precision. He would have arrived at his parents' Chestnut Hill mansion at exactly 7 o'clock, punctual as always. The circular driveway would be lined with luxury cars, the Whitmore's Jaguar, the Andersons' Mercedes, his father's newest Bentley. Inside, champagne would flow freely, conversation a carefully orchestrated dance of business connections and social leverage. He would check his watch repeatedly as 8 o'clock approached, his excuses for my absence growing thinner. "Sarah's running late." Women, you know how they are with their preparations. Then later, with forced laughter, "I may need to send a search party." By 9 the whispers would begin, Margaret's pinched expression communicating her displeasure more eloquently than words. At some point, probably around 10, he would excuse himself to make a call. My phone would ring in an empty house on Beacon Hill. That's when the first seed of doubt would plant itself. Robert would maintain his composure through the remainder of the evening, of course. The Carters never showed distress in public. I imagine he left his parents' house shortly after 11, driving the familiar route to our townhouse with mounting anger. He would blame me first, for embarrassing him, for ruining his mother's birthday, for selfishly creating drama. It wouldn't occur to him yet that I had actually left. Emma and I speculated about all this over breakfast the next morning in her sunny kitchen nook. She made pancakes while I brewed coffee, the mundane domesticity of it almost shocking after the tension of the past week. "Do you think he called the police?" she asked, sliding a plate toward me. I shook my head. Robert would never involve authorities if he could help it. The Carters handle their problems privately. I took a sip of coffee. Besides, I'm an adult who chose to leave. I didn't take anything that wasn't legally mine. There's no crime to report. Around noon, my prepaid phone buzzed again. Another text from Lisa. "He's telling everyone you're having a mental health crisis. Called Dr. Weber. Be prepared." Dr. Weber was the psychiatrist who had treated me for what Robert called adjustment anxiety during our first year of marriage. In reality, I had been struggling with the suffocating expectations of fitting into the Carter world. The doctor, a golf buddy of Robert's father, had prescribed anti-anxiety medication and advised me to lean into your new role. "He's laying groundwork," I told Emma, showing her the text. "If I'm unstable, then anything I say about him becomes suspect." She frowned. "That's beyond manipulative. That's genuinely scary, Sarah." Later that afternoon, I used Emma's laptop to check the joint email account Robert and I had shared for household matters. There were 3 messages from him, escalating in tone. 10:23 p.m. Where are you? Call me immediately. 1:17 a.m. This childish behavior is unacceptable. I'm coming home now. We will discuss this when I arrive. 3:44 a.m. Sarah, this has gone far enough. If you don't contact me by morning, I will be forced to take measures I'd rather avoid. I closed the browser without responding. Robert's measures were predictable. He would use his money and connections to try to force me back into the role I'd abandoned. But knowing his playbook gave me an advantage. I could stay one step ahead. Emma had a faculty meeting that evening, so I was alone in her apartment when her landline rang around 6. I let it go to voicemail, my heart racing when Robert's voice filled the room. Emma Keller? This is Robert Carter. I believe you may have information about my wife's whereabouts. This is a family emergency, and I would appreciate your immediate callback. He left his number, his tone perfectly balanced between concern and authority. I deleted the message and called Emma immediately. He found you, I said when she answered. I don't know how. Your old address book, maybe? Or social media before you deleted it? She paused. What do you want to do? I need to move faster than I planned, I said, my mind already calculating options. He'll keep calling. He might even show up there. You can stay with my sister in Hartford, Emma offered. He doesn't know about her. But even as she spoke, I knew I needed to go further. Robert would expect me to rely on old connections, people from my past. Actually, I think I should head west, to my grandmother's property. The half-acre plot in the Berkshires had been a weekend retreat for my grandmother, a place she'd gone to paint and find peace away from city life. The cabin was basic. No central heating, just a wood stove, running water but no hot water heater. Robert had dismissed it as rustic, in the most derogatory sense. But it was mine, and he'd likely forgotten about it entirely. The next morning, I withdrew half the money from my new account, leaving no electronic trail for the next phase of my journey. Emma drove me to the bus station, and we hugged goodbye with promises to stay in touch through my prepaid phone. 3 hours later, I arrived in the small town of Great Barrington, where I used cash to buy supplies. Basic groceries, bottled water, a flashlight, matches, and warm blankets. The local hardware store owner, a weathered man named Jim, raised an eyebrow at my purchases. Setting up camp somewhere? Something like that, I replied with a smile. Would you know anyone who could give me a ride to Old Mill Road? I'm visiting family property there, but don't have a car. Jim scratched his beard. My nephew Tanner does odd jobs with his pickup. He could run you out there for $30. An hour later, Tanner, a quiet 20-something with kind eyes, was driving me along winding country roads toward my grandmother's cabin. He asked no questions about why a woman alone was heading to an isolated property with only a suitcase and some supplies. Been empty a while, he commented, as we turned onto the dirt driveway, nearly hidden by overgrown bushes. The cabin sat in a small clearing, its weathered clapboards gray against the vibrant spring green of the surrounding forest. Want me to check it out first? Make sure there's no critters taking up residence? I was touched by his concern. That would be great, thank you. The cabin was dusty but intact. Tanner helped me bring in my supplies, checked that the wood stove was functioning, and made sure the pump for the well was working before he left. Town's about 7 miles that way, he said, pointing. If you need anything, the store has a landline. Most folks around here don't pry, but they help if asked. As his truck disappeared down the driveway, leaving me truly alone for the first time, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief at having escaped Robert's immediate reach, anxiety about surviving in such a remote location, and a strange sense of homecoming, as if my grandmother's spirit somehow lingered in the rough-hewn walls of the cabin she had loved. Meanwhile, I could picture Robert's growing desperation back in Boston. By now, he would have called everyone in our social circle. He would have gone to my former workplace at the gallery, perhaps even tracked down some of my college acquaintances. Finding Emma would have seemed like a breakthrough, only to lead to another dead end. The Robert I knew would be incandescent with rage by now, his perfect Carter control slipping. Not because he missed me, but because I had defied him, escaped his carefully constructed cage, taken back the power he believed was rightfully his. That evening, I built a small fire in the wood stove and watched shadows dance across the cabin walls. The diamond necklace caught the firelight as I removed it for the first time since leaving Boston. I held it in my palm, this small piece of my heritage that had somehow catalyzed my liberation. My phone had no signal here, a fact that was both concerning and freeing. Robert couldn't reach me, but neither could I reach out if I needed help. I was truly on my own, perhaps for the first time in my adult life. As I settled onto the narrow bed that had been my grandmother's, wrapped in blankets against the spring mountain chill, I thought about what Robert might be doing at that exact moment. Would he be pacing our Beacon Hill townhouse, phone in hand, barking orders at private investigators? Would he be drinking his expensive scotch, plotting his next move? Or would he be sitting in stunned silence, finally confronting the possibility that the woman he had sought to possess had slipped through his fingers like smoke? I hoped it was the latter. I hoped my absence had cracked his certainty, forced him to see himself clearly for perhaps the first time. The note I'd left was brief but unequivocal. No dramatics, no accusations, just a simple declaration of independence that left no room for misinterpretation. In the quiet darkness of the cabin, I made a promise to myself. However long it took, whatever resources Robert deployed to find me, I would not return to a life of beautiful subjugation. The woman who had left that note on the door was emerging from a long sleep, reclaiming her voice, her choices, her very self. Outside, an owl called into the night, its cry both mournful and fierce. I drifted to sleep with that sound in my ears, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring. A new chapter begins. Spring melted into summer in the Berkshires. I marked the passing days in a journal I'd bought in the Great Barrington General Store, where I ventured once a week for supplies. My grandmother's cabin, which had felt so foreign at first, became a sanctuary. I repaired the sagging porch steps, patched the leaky roof, and planted a small vegetable garden beside the sunny southern wall. Each improvement felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. The locals gradually accepted my presence with the quiet respect typical of small New England towns. To them, I was simply Sarah Thompson, a writer working on a book, the cover story I'd crafted when questions inevitably arose. No one needed to know about Boston, about Robert, about the woman I'd been. Here, I could reinvent myself one careful step at a time. 6 weeks after my escape, I checked my prepaid phone to find a voicemail from Emma. "Sarah, he came to my office today," she said, her voice tight with tension. "Robert, he had a photo of you. He's hired someone, a private investigator, I think. I didn't tell him anything, but be careful. Call me when you can." I didn't call. It was safer for Emma if our contact remained minimal. Instead, I walked to the edge of my property, where a small stream created a natural boundary, and considered my options. Robert finding Emma wasn't surprising, but it confirmed my suspicions that he hadn't given up. The question was how far he would go to find me. That evening, I made a decision. If I remained in hiding, constantly looking over my shoulder, Robert would still control my life from afar. True freedom meant building something new, not just running from the old. I needed to establish legal independence that even his money and connections couldn't override. The next day, I hiked to town and used the library's computer to research divorce attorneys in Western Massachusetts. I found a small firm in Pittsfield specializing in complex divorces, particularly those involving financial disparity and control issues. Their website promised discretion and experience with high-conflict cases. I sent an email requesting an appointment. 3 days later, I sat across from Diane Levinson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s whose office walls displayed degrees from Yale and Boston University law. I told her everything: the manipulation, the financial control, the isolation, and finally, my escape. She listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. "Your husband has resources," she said when I finished. "He'll likely contest everything. And from what you've told me, he won't respond well to losing control of the narrative." "I know," I replied, "but I can't live in hiding forever." Diane nodded. "Then we build a case so strong he can't dispute it. We document the financial manipulation. We get statements from anyone who witnessed concerning behavior. We file for a restraining order based on emotional abuse and implicit threats. And we do it all at once, so he's responding to our actions instead of dictating terms. Over the next month, I worked with Diane to gather evidence. Bank statements showing accounts emptied overnight, emails containing veiled threats, a statement from Emma about Robert's intimidating visit to her office, medical records from my sessions with Dr. Weber, recontextualized to show how Robert had pathologized my normal responses to his control tactics. The work was exhausting, but empowering. Each document assembled was another brick in the wall I was building between my past and future. At night, I still startled at unfamiliar sounds, half expecting to see headlights coming up my isolated driveway. But each morning, I woke to birdsong and the simple pleasure of making my own choices, however small. In mid-July, I received another text from Lisa. He's telling people you've had a breakdown and are in a facility somewhere. Mother is hosting sympathetic tea parties. Thought you should know. I wasn't surprised. Painting me as mentally unstable was Robert's most logical move. It discredited anything I might say about him while casting him as the concerned husband. Classic manipulation, turning public opinion in his favor while laying groundwork to challenge my competence in any legal proceedings. When I shared this development with Diane, she was unfazed. It's predictable, which makes it easier to counter. We'll have you evaluated by an independent psychologist. When a professional certifies you're perfectly sane and making rational choices, his narrative falls apart. The psychological evaluation was scheduled for early August. Dr. Harriet Chen, a respected forensic psychologist, spent 4 hours interviewing me in her Northampton office. Her questions were thorough, but compassionate, exploring not just my mental state, but the dynamics of my marriage and my reasons for leaving. Mrs. Carter, or do you prefer Ms. Thompson? She asked as our session concluded. Thompson, I said firmly. I'm reclaiming my name along with everything else. She nodded. Ms. Thompson, based on our conversation, I see no evidence of thought disorder, emotional instability, or impaired decision-making capacity. What I do see is a woman making difficult but rational choices to protect herself from an emotionally abusive relationship. My report will reflect this. 2 weeks later, Diane filed for divorce on my behalf, along with a restraining order and a comprehensive financial disclosure request. The documents were served to Robert at his office, a public setting where he would be forced to maintain his composure. That night, alone in my cabin, I waited for the inevitable fallout. It came in the form of 3 rapid-fire texts from Lisa. Papers served. He's furious. Locked himself in his office at home. I can hear things breaking. Mom says you've destroyed the family. Dad is calling in favors with judge friends. Watch your back. I forwarded the messages to Diane, who responded immediately. Expected. His lawyers will contact me tomorrow. Stay where you are. Stay safe. The next morning, I sat on my porch, watching the sun rise over the trees. A family of deer grazed peacefully at the edge of the clearing, unaware of the human drama unfolding around them. The diamond necklace hung at my throat, catching the early light. I hadn't taken it off since leaving Boston. My talisman, my connection to a strength greater than my own. Robert's legal response was predictably aggressive. His attorneys, from one of Boston's most prestigious firms, filed motions challenging everything from the jurisdiction of the divorce to my mental competence. They demanded I return to Boston for hearings, knowing I would be vulnerable there. Diane countered each move expertly, insisting on neutral territory for any necessary meetings and presenting Dr. Chen's evaluation to refute claims about my mental state. The legal battle would be long and painful, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. And unlike Robert, I had nothing left to lose. As summer faded into fall, I found myself drawn to the small community center in Great Barrington. They were looking for volunteers to help with their women's program, specifically a support group for those dealing with domestic abuse. I hesitated initially, wary of exposing myself, but something about the simple flyer taped to the general store's bulletin board called to me. Perhaps helping others navigate their own journeys to freedom might help me process mine. The program coordinator, a gentle woman named Meredith, didn't ask for my background, just my commitment. I started by helping with administrative tasks, making copies, organizing resource materials, answering phones. But gradually, I found myself sharing small pieces of my story with the women who came through the center's doors. Not all details, not yet, but enough to connect. Enough to say, I understand. I've been there too. One evening in late September, a young woman arrived at the center with a bruised cheek and frightened eyes. She couldn't have been more than 25. As I helped Meredith get her settled in the center's emergency shelter, she clutched my hand and whispered, "Does it ever get better? Does the fear ever go away?" I thought about my journey over the past months, from the prison of my perfect Boston life to the hard-won freedom of my grandmother's cabin, about waking up each morning knowing my choices were my own, about the legal battle still ahead, but also about the quiet strength I'd discovered within myself. "Yes," I told her, my hand steady around hers. "It gets better. The fear doesn't disappear entirely. It changes shape, becomes more manageable. But the freedom, the chance to rediscover yourself, that's worth everything." Later that night, as I drove the familiar road back to my cabin, I reflected on how far I'd come. The woman who had left that note on Robert's door 6 months ago had been running away, desperate and afraid. The woman I was becoming was running toward something, a life of my own making, with purpose and meaning beyond survival. Robert would continue his pursuit. Of that I had no doubt. His lawyers would file more motions. His private investigators might even eventually track me to the Berkshires. The divorce would be ugly, possibly public. The Carter family would use every resource to maintain their carefully crafted image, even at my expense. But as I pulled up to my cabin, now glowing with warm light from the windows I'd washed and the lamps I'd selected, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I would never go back. The price for peace had been high. Financial security, social standing, the comfortable predictability of my former life, but standing in the quiet of my own space, answering to no one but myself, I knew it had been worth every penny. I made tea in the kitchen I'd painted sunshine yellow, and carried it to the porch, where I'd installed a simple swing. The night air was crisp with autumn's approach, the stars impossibly bright above the clearing. My grandmother's necklace caught their distant light as I reached up to touch it. A habit now, a reminder of where I'd come from and how far I'd traveled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Another legal filing to review with Diane, more women to support at the center, continued vigilance against Robert's efforts to find me. But tonight, wrapped in quiet solitude, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Pride. Not in running away, but in running toward myself, in breaking the chains that had bound me not just to Robert, but to a lifetime of trying to be what others wanted, in finding the courage to say enough and mean it. The woman Robert had married, the compliant, pleasing shadow I'd become, no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that freedom wasn't just about escape. It was about building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. And as I sipped my tea under the stars, surrounded by the life I was creating one day at a time, I finally allowed myself to believe that I would not just survive this chapter of my story. I would write the rest of the book myself,